Today we're going to be installing a flanged window in a wall that already has zip system sheathing installed. The goal here is to connect the WRB of our wall to the WRB of our window to make one continuous environmental separator. The first step in that separation is we're going to prep the sill pan below the window. To start, we're going to bevel the sill. And there's two different ways that we can do that. One, we can use a piece of cedar bevel siding like we're going to do here, creating a positive slope to the outside. Two, we could also do this in rough framing. So we could add a 5-degree pitch to the outside in the rough framing sill. That'll give us a positive slope to the outside in the event that we ever have moisture. We'll take just a couple roofing nails, just something to tack it into place and hold it for the moment. Now that we have this sill installed, the next thing is going to be our stretch tape. For me, that starts with a centerline layout and layouts up each jamb to the point that I need that tape to go. That way I don't make any mistakes on placing my tape. So I'll mark center on the sill, and then I'll mark 6 inches up each side. And the reason I'm going 6 inches up each side is that gives me enough to turn the corner, and it gives me a good point of reference where I'm not trying to push just a small piece of tape around the corner. I want it up high enough that I get good adhesion. Okay, let's talk sill pan flashing. We can do this in a couple different ways. The first way, our preferred method, is we'll use a stretchable tape that will flash from the sill out and onto the wall. It also will allow us to turn the corner up both sides so that we're able to go from our layout line down, around, and back up to our layout line in one piece. If you don't have the stretch tape, you can go with a straight tape, a straight flashing tape, and you can achieve the same thing, but this time you're going to be using more pieces. Let me show you how that works. First, I'm going to cut a bow tie shaped piece of the flashing tape, and this will be our piece that actually bridges that connection from our sill to our wall. And you can notice here that I'm using the Huber family of products. Whatever manufacturer you're working with, my recommendation is stick with one manufacturer. That way you have one rep or one warranty to deal with if you ever have an issue. You won't run into, well, their tape isn't designed to work with our system or anything of the sort. So there's our first step. We're going to flash the pan. Second, we're going to cut a V or a triangle out of both sides of this 6-inch piece. And then we're able to apply this so that when we turn the corner, we're getting rid of a lot of that material. And we've now taken care of, you'll see after I put this last vertical piece on, we've taken care of what would have been a pinhole gap. And now we're able to go vertically . We'll make one cut back this direction, fold in. Now that we have these 3 pieces of tape in place, we're managing the water at our edge. We want to take one more run of the tape in the back to protect that sill as far back as we can, and then the whole system will get rolled in place. This is a pressure sensitive adhesive, and we need that pressure to make it adhere to our substrate. Now we're going to install my preferred method, the stretch tape. We have that layout line on the center here. We also have a center line layout on our tape. That center line means that we'll end up with the same excess or the same amount after we try to turn the corners. So I like to peel the tape one side at a time. This can be a little unwieldy to do by yourself. On a larger window, you certainly wouldn't try it by yourself. I'll peel this tape back. We'll peel all the way down, trying to keep it from sticking to itself or anything else. So now when we open up, we're going to start on that center line, and we're going to start most of the way back in the opening, and it gives us the ability to lay it each direction, tack it temporarily over there, work our way back this direction. Before I really make that turn, I like to take my speed square, push it right into the corner so that I know that I don't have a big rounded corner. I'll push up. Once we're to this point, I'm able to turn starting at the corner and work my way out. And you may see it start to try to return to its original position, but once you give it a little bit of pressure, it'll stay where you want it. And all we're looking for is to shed that water from the sill out and down. So same thing in this corner. I'll take my speed square. I'll create that nice square corner. I'll push it the rest of the way vertically, and then starting at the corner and working my way back again, I'm going to push everything out. Once we have this tape down and where we want it, we're going to start by rolling. That pressure sensitive tape will actually wet to the surface once we have rolled the entire system. Now that our sill is installed and we've rolled it in place, we're able to make a transition and work on the vertical. The vertical seam or the vertical connection from our WRB on our wall, we're going to push to the inside and connect to our rough framing. That's going to prevent any air or water moving in between the connection of these two things. And for that, we're going to use the seam tape. On the vertical, we're still going to overlap everything below it. We're not worried about the horizontal seam that comes in here. We will be concerned with any seams on the head, but we'll cover that when we get there. So to start out with, I'm going to put some layout marks because I like to work cleanly. So I'm going to push a measurement of 2 inches out. The tape's 3 3/4 wide. I'm also going to add a small reference mark at the top as a point for when I start this tape and that run to come down. I don't want the tape to go beyond that 2-inch mark. And we're going to continue and mark both sides. Now we're ready for the tape. I won't pre-cut this because it doesn't have a backing on it. I also am a really big fan of making sure that I complete each step before I move on. So I'll get in the habit of rolling each piece of tape before I move on to the next one. Small slice here to fold in, a small slice at the top to fold in. I like to press everything in place with my hand first because if you don't, the tape could actually shift a little. I'll start in the middle and work my way out. It's not a major concern if the stretch tape or your sill pan tape protrudes past the sides because they're still overlapping the correct direction. Fold that tape in. Everything will get some by hand pressure to make sure that it's seated in the place that I want it before I roll it. And then again, everything gets pressure. It's pressure sensitive tape. It won't stick long term if you don't allow it to grab by actually rolling it. And you don't want to use your hand as the roller because you won't get even pressure. Now that we have our jambs installed, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to address this head flashing. Now this is a tape that isn't required by most window manufacturers or Pella. It's also not required to get your warranty from the makers of the zip system sheathing. However, if we're sealing from this sheathing down to the jamb, it accomplishes the same thing that we've done on the sides. It stops an air leakage at that framing member. There are a couple other things that we have to address while we're here. Because we have a vertical seam in our mock-up, we'll put our line across, our layout line for our tape so that it can be nice, neat, and straight. But here, that layout line will also give us a reference for where we should cut that tape off, because we want that tape to come down and lap over this in the end. So we'll cut that off or we'll peel it back and we'll have the ability for everything to shingle into place. So again, we'll start with our layout marks. And then I'm going to take my knife and I'm going to go up roughly 1/4 inch. That'll give me plenty of room to get my tape in there, get it rolled, and then when we add another piece at the end, will be covering over that. There's one more step before that head flashing tape. We're going to address the joint between our header and our jack studs, and we're just going to simply put a piece of tape that turns the corner, and that tape is going to run lengthwise through the opening. When working with this stuff, my favorite thing to do is lightly tack it to something, and then I'm able to cut it. That way I didn't try to reel it out and keep it in my hand. So now I can take this piece, tuck it into the corner, slowly work it in so that it's straight, use my hand again to make sure I like where it's touching. And then we'll do the same thing on the other side before we move on to that head flashing. I'm going to roll those things before I move on to the head flashing. Now I've limited the ability from air inside the opening in the corner to migrate out and in between jack studs and king studs. The last piece of tape. And I'm going to allow that tape to fly a little past my vertical jambs on each side, ensuring that I'm covering fully. It also gives the ability to make my cut away from that piece of tape, rather than here, I'm out a little bit. I'll press it in place with my hand, make my vertical cuts, and then fold it inward. Pressing it in place with your hand really makes sure that you're going to limit the amount of air bubbles that you're trapping inside of it, or just poor placement. Roll it, and we're ready to unpack the window. Now that the rough opening is flashed, it's time to install the window. The first step in installing the window is we're going to add some shims to the sill. For our sill, because we have that slope cedar, we're going to use a couple other pieces of that slope cedar. We're going to turn around the other direction, and that's going to do two things for us. First, it's going to create a level platform for our window to sit on. It's going to support the jamb coming down, and then it's also going to help us center the window in the opening. If we have the window centered in the opening, we have the best opportunity to get equal insulation or air sealing around the interior side. After those cedar shims are sitting in place, we'll check them with the level to make sure that we like their location and make sure that the window is going to sit level in the opening. At this time, if we needed to make any adjustments, we could place shims underneath or on top of these pieces of cedar. Once we have them where we like them, we'll go ahead and use a couple pieces of the leftover tape and just tack those in place so that they don't shift when we're sliding the window into place from the outside. And once we have this second shim in place, we're ready to prep the window. As you can see, we're folding this nailing fin up. There's a couple different ways that a fin might ship to you. One, it would already be in this 90-degree orientation. Two, it could be integrated like this one, but needed to be folded up. Or three, sometimes they'll ship separately depending on the size of the window, or patio doors ship that way that you'd seat in a bead of sealant. Here we have it resting on a couple stacks of 2x4s. That way we can rotate and fold this flange out without having any worries. Now we're going to pick the window up, and we'll do a temporary fit. And the reason for this temporary fit is we want to make sure that we know first that the window is going to fit. We'll get it centered in the opening with the help of an interior carpenter. And now we'll take and trace 3 sides of this opening around the fin. And the reason for tracing this is this gives me a clear point of where I want my sealant to go after I set the window back down. That way I'm avoiding putting my hands in sealant. I'm avoiding putting the window in and out in the wrong location. Now we'll set it down, and we'll get our sealant. We're going to apply a bead of silicone sealant to both sides and the top of this opening. We're not going to apply any to the bottom because we want to leave this sill open so the water finds its way in. It has a pathway to the outside. The silicone that we're using, we've checked. We make sure that it is approved by the manufacturer of both our substrate and our window. It's not required by all window manufacturers, but here we're just using it as a belt and suspenders approach. Now we're ready to place our window.
How are you doing on your end?
I'm good. Now we can tack it in 2 places at the top corners, check it for level, plumb, and square. Now that we know the window is level, plumb, and square, it's time to finalize our fastening. Depending on manufacturer recommendations, it may be every hole or it may be every other. You need to check with the manufacturer and the instructions they've provided. On this particular unit, it's every opening. Now that we have our window securely fastened, it's level, plumb, and square, it's time to move on to final flashing. The final flashing for this window involves a few more pieces of tape. We'll leave the sill open still so that we have that available drainage. We'll have a piece of tape on each side and a couple across the head. Let me show you what that looks like. Because of our integrated flange, we want to make sure that our tape turns from the wall and then the flange onto the edge of the window, protecting that joint between the flange and the window. I'll start by working in some small sections to make sure that I'm both in the location that I want on the WRB and on the window. Again, I'm pushing it in place with my hand. That way I can seat the tape where I want and I'm not relying on the placement of my roller to hold the tape where I want. Next, where the tape transitions from being on the edge of the window to needing to lay flat, I'll make a simple cut here and one at the top. I like to roll that piece of tape in, get it completely seated before I move on to the next piece of tape. That way I don't miss anything in my process. Same thing on the second side. We're ensuring that the transition from our WRB to the edge of our window is covered and is one continuous surface. Now that we have our sides flashed, it's time to move on to our head. Again, this is a couple pieces of tape. We have a vertical seam simulated on our mock-up here. What we're going to do is we'll peel this tape back, fold it to the side. We'll apply one run of tape, the same as we did on the sides, so that we're flashing from the WRB to the edge of the window, past the flange joint. And then we'll come back and we'll add a second one that's a little wider and a little higher. And then we'll be able to fold this back over the top and everything will shingle as if it were a roof. We're going to take this first run past whatever horizontal we have. That way we're completing our taping a little further out each time. The opposite of the verticals, we're going to cut that a little bit so that we can lay it flat. We're going to continue to work this flat and down onto the top of the window, bridging from the WRB past the nailing fin and onto the edge of the window. Now this piece of tape I'll just seat with my hand. The next piece we'll roll both at the same time. So we're going to get a little wider and a little higher with each pass. We can seat that tape one more time and finalize its install with the roller. We're making sure we get on both sides of the window. Now we're ready to bring this head flashing tape back down. Just like the horizontal, it gets rolled in place as well. Now that that vertical seam is rolled, it's attached to our head flashing and down our sides. We're completely managed for water. If we wanted to, we could add a head flashing, and that head flashing would be taped horizontally with the vertical legs sitting over top of it, just like we have here. We're not going to install a head flashing on this mock-up. Now, let's go inside and talk about air sealing. Now that our exterior is watertight, we're inside and we're going to deal with air and thermal. We're going to do that using a spray foam application around the perimeter of the window. This method will actually apply no matter what your WRB is on the outside. Our goal here is not to completely fill the void. We're just trying to fill the first inch or so from our side towards the outside. It leaves an open area on the outside of the window that if we ever have any moisture in that assembly, it's able to migrate out. We're taking special care to be using the correct foam in this assembly. This is a formulation made for windows and doors, which means it's not going to cause our jambs to bow or bind in any way. Now that our foam's installed, we'll let it dry, trim back any that needs to be cut away, and then we have one more air sealing detail. Now that we've given the foam a few moments to skin over, we can apply a sealant over any shim that we have. That will bridge from foam across the shim and back to the foam, making one continuous air seal. With those last beads of sealant in place, the interior is detailed, the exterior is detailed, and we're confident that this is going to be a leak-free installation.